The automobile, I would argue, is the most significant technology of the 20th century. If you take the whole century as a whole, and you know, as the most significant technology, in some ways, the most personal technology for that century, anyway, at least for the most of that century. Most of us have a lot of relationships with our car. We remember that first car that we ever drove, and we remember getting our license, and you know, going to grad probably, and you know, all the things that we get married in special cars, we get buried in special cars. You know, our lives are, we invite the cars into our house in our, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 car garages. You know, eat in them, probably not so much anymore, but in my generation and my parents' generation, you know, we made babies in them. They, you know, they were a private space for people who didn't have private space. So, and yet all of this is not the kind of history that gets written down in the kind of the big memoirs or the big reminiscences or the you know, ways that we normally archive really important parts of our world. And so when I saw this assignment that Steve had used in his class, and in that case he was asking students to write autobiographies, and I love the pun there too, obviously, biographies of their family's use of the automobile. When I taught the automobile course, I gave the students a choice of doing that or some more standard assignment. So it wasn't a compulsory assignment. And so often it was the best or the more curious students who took up the challenge. The assignment was to go as far back as they could in their family history by interviewing parents often, but if they were able to, grandparents. And it worked out fantastically.
I really enjoyed the essays that incorporated photographs. And there were some really creative interplays of photographs of grandma's car, grandpa's car, and the advertising that they probably witnessed when they were thinking about buying the cars. You know, the car as a signal of social and financial well-being in the family, and how things changed within the family, and that was reflected in the kind of cars that they drove. I think, you know, when you think about the car as a technology, I think that my generation and probably the generation of our students, we tend to think of the car as something that's almost part of the natural world. It's been so integrated into society and culture that it almost becomes an invisible part of it. And that is actually kind of an amazing thing. I would agree with you that the car is probably the most important technology in the 20th century. How has this kind of history that the students put together, how can it play out, do you think, in their lives, in the lives of historians, in how we approach things? Was there a transformative quality to the assignment itself?
You know what, the beauty of this assignment is it has two great outcomes. So the one outcome is what I think is an intimate archive of how people related to the automobile, which exists nowhere else, you know, well, almost nowhere else. Relatively few people sit down and write a diary about their relationship with the automobile. I'm not saying nobody does. So that's, I think, for, you know, 21st and 22nd and 23rd century historians who, you know, the automobile will be something archaic to them. This will be like the proconsuls, you know, notes back in ancient Greece or Rome. But the other benefit was, it was really beautiful to look at these essays and see how they're constructed and see how they required the students to have conversations with their parents, which they have never had before. Mm-hmm. And so I was just thinking of one, you know, a student interviewing her dad about his first car and the feeling of freedom he had and his long hair. And she was surprised he had long hair, you know, when he was driving with the hair blowing through his, you know, so, and it's an opportunity for the families to bring out those old photo albums. You were talking about how they've incorporated and tell stories. And in many cases, students were able to interview either in person or over the phone because often grandparents live far away, their grandparents. But today, with Zoom everywhere, and be able to snap photos of photos, it's really easy to move that kind of stuff around. So one of the